Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, you're holding up. What is that? A bologna sandwich? What's in that sandwich, Mickey?
Bob, you should be able to guess what's in the
Ham
sandwich.
sandwich? You know what you
A
can
ham
indict?
sandwich.
You know what you can indict, Mickey? You know what any prosecutor can indict? A ham
Exactly.
sandwich.
Exactly.
This time they indicted a ham.
We don't even have to say anymore. That's I usually have better props than that, but that's what I got this week.
Actually, that's in the 50th percentile.
Because they indicted Trump. Bizarrely, we don't know we don't know what they indicted him on. As we tape, the indictment has not been made public. It's possible that it's not just this Stormy Daniels stuff, that it's actually involves some other tax stuff, which would be bad for Trump. But the assumption seems to be that it's mostly charging him with falsifying business records to hide a campaign expense, which was paying off Stormy Daniels, and that it was really should have been done with campaign funds, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. I mean, if they had done it with campaign funds, there would probably be other grounds for indicting him. But anyway,
exactly.
You're right.
You're not allowed. You're not allowed. I mean, John Edwards had this conundrum. Yeah. If you pay off your mistress with the campaign funds, that's probably illegal too, because the prosecutor will argue it's personal, not political.
Now, the apparently legal thing would have been to just call the expenditure a campaign contribution. That would have been legal if they had done it that way, right?
I'm not so sure, because you can't buy a house with campaign contributions, right? You're not allowed to use campaign contributions to buy stuff for yourself. So if you could argue that it's personal, why isn't that illegal too? I mean, Trump can give unlimited amounts to his own campaign.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But yeah, I think he's still in a bind. How do you pay off your mistress? It's a dilemma.
It is a dilemma,
Can't do that.
And all of us have wrestled with this, Mickey. And
I know I was a candidate. Don't think I didn't spend.
As I recall, that's what sank your otherwise buoyant candidacy.
But it seems to me there was a way around it. But
yeah, actually, no, I don't really see.
You have to somehow declare that it's definitely a campaign expense. I am discouraging bad publicity or something. I don't know. It still seems questionable. The prosecutors can get you coming and going.
Well, the logic of this is that it was a legitimate campaign expense in a certain sense. You can pay for an NDA, right? One can in life pay off a porn star without breaking the law.
Yes, but that's if you're not a candidate. If you're a candidate, then the question is, what money do you use, and is it a campaign expense or a personal expense? And either way, the prosecution can say it's the other one.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, what the prosecutor is saying, in effect, is I think it would have been legitimate campaign expense. Obviously, if Trump had spent the campaign money, a prosecutor might have said something.
I mean, it's basically
you know what I'm thinking the moral of the story is, Mickey? Stay faithful to your wife. Okay? Because then you don't run into questions like this.
Good point. But the basic, I think, word problem is everything these guys do in their whole lives is designed to further their campaign. So you buy a house in the district you want to run in, or in the state you want to run in. The real reason is you're trying to further your political career. Does that mean you have to declare it a campaign expense that pay with campaign money? No, but it's very hard to say where to draw the line. And the campaign laws require you to try to draw the line, and you should draw it very strictly around things that are just obviously campaign expenses, like you buy TV time, you pay for mailers, you pay volunteers, or you pay workers, you pay for your staff. But other things like sort of gauzier, just basic life choices, like are you faithful to your wife? That's really,
right.
You should basically let them get paid off.
Look, we agreed last week that we're not in favor of this indictment. If this is what it is, and I think this almost certainly is the heart of it, actually. But as I said, if you're going to indict a former president who's running for re-election, it better be a strong indictment. I think most people agree this isn't one, because the falsifying business records is itself just a misdemeanor. What makes it a felony is doing it in furtherance of another crime. And that's the ambitious part of this indictment, is arguing that this was, in effect, a campaign contribution.
Right.
That apparently is the other crime, the unreported campaign contribution. It's obviously a very highly implicit, at best, campaign contribution.
Well, I mean, you assume that Michael Cohen may have something in writing saying we got to do this, for the campaign.
In furtherance of my campaign interests, signed Donald Trump.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that he didn't also have other motives, like not embarrassing his wife in public, which would also hurt his campaign.
Well, no doubt that was part of it. I mean,
right.
That's why it would have been a dubious campaign expenditure if he'd done it that way.
Right.
It's kind of for your personal life too. Apparently there are more than 20 counts in the indictment. We haven't seen the indictment, but it makes you wonder how many counts can you get out of what we've just described?
I guess the theory is that he got a separate count off of every entry into his business records. But, but it could be more. They could be getting him on some tax thing too. So who knows? The conventional wisdom is this: it helps him in the primary. Although you wonder, is he going to stop attacking DeSantis now? So maybe it won't help him that much. It hurts him in the general election because the independents and all the people who were queasy about him and showed it in 2020 are not going to feel less queasy about him just because of this indictment. So I have no reason to question that conventional wisdom. It could be wrong. The other conventional wisdom is it going to rip the country apart, divide us even more into warring tribes. I'm not sure about that. I have the theory that it's like LAX airport. The airport's so dangerous, it's safe. So every pilot who's flying into LAX, I mean, I think they even have planes like landing and taking in opposite directions. I mean, it's incredibly unsafe. And so pilots are really on alert when they land at LA. And it actually has a fairly good safety record. So
what's the other half of this metaphor? What is
the other half of the metaphor? Is people are so worried about the country coming apart that they actually are going to make an actual effort not to rip the country apart. So
America so polarized that we're singing Kumbaya. Okay.
Well, I just think people they're staring at the abyss and they don't want to go into the abyss. So
well, I think the people you worry about don't have those kinds of concerns. I mean, it's always the relatively small number of fiery extremists who start these things, and I don't think they're worried.
Not always. In the 60s, there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people ripping the country apart. Only a few weathermen.
Well, no, there weren't. No, there weren't. They were just demonstrations are fine. I mean, that's not what tears the country apart.
But my point is, well, it does tear the country apart. Sure, it tears the country apart if people don't talk to each other because they disagree on politics. That doesn't require violence. I think that's more what people are talking about. And Trump is not turning out big crowds of protesters. I think those will fizzle. But you have to worry about the small groups of people with guns.
Have there been protests?
January 6th. He's called for some protests, and they were like, a handful of people. And he had a rally in Waco that some people say was big. Didn't impress me, but
wasn't huge. Of course, Waco isn't exactly Central Park. You gotta, it's not a big population center.
Well, but it's right in the middle of Texas, right near huge population centers like Dallas and Houston.
It's a little San Antonio. South of Dallas.
Like in the middle of it.
It's far away from Houston, but anyway, weird place to do it. I mean, that was that meant to be a reference to the Waco?
He explicitly made a reference to Waco. Yeah.
Meaning for our younger viewers, there was this. What was the guy's name? The cult leader,
David
Koresh. The Clinton administration handled it ham-handedly, wound up killing number of people there.
What happened is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms did instead of arresting this guy when he went jogging every day, I even forget what they were arresting him for. He was famed the world over because he knew the Bible backwards and forwards. He knew every word of the Bible, and he attracted a group of fairly appealing followers, including a black Harvard law graduate who was a very impressive person. They all went to learn the Bible from him. He also believed in having underage sex with some of his flock. And I forget what they were busting.
I think child endangerment may have been the.
Anyway, they chose to raid the compound, and the Koresh people fired back and killed 4 agents.
Yeah.
And after that, the agents were not showing any mercy at all. They
and then
were
the place
off.
went up in flames, right?
And then they eventually got Janet Reno to authorize a raid, which set the place on fire and killed all of them.
So naturally, that's the place Trump chose to launch his campaign. Just soak up those positive vibes.
It was a black helicopter moment of people being worried about federal government overreach. Right. And he also played a tape from the January 6th choir. So he embraced that cause. It was a horrible rally, but I don't think it showed that he's going to get vast numbers of people protesting this indictment, especially if they think it's a nothing burger.
Mickey, I think strictly speaking, the black helicopters come from the world government, not the federal government. In
your dreams.
No, in the official iconography of the far right. Isn't that right?
I thought the black helicopters involved people raiding various compounds in Montana.
Yeah, Kofi Annan parachuting in. Yeah.
Was it? I thought it was just the federal government.
No, I think black helicopters of the year. We'll have to have Alex.
Where they shot that guy, the sharpshooter shot the wrong person.
Well, that was a big in fact, the Oklahoma City bombing was on the anniversary of that, right? Was it not? Anyway,
I don't know.
We digress.
Anyway,
so Trump indicted. That's the takeaway, folks. If you haven't heard that yet, this is the podcast you come to for your news. And Donald Trump, let me just repeat this, Mickey. Donald Trump has been indicted.
This is a good time to take care of the DeSantis business so we get all the campaign stuff out of the way.
What business would that be?
He appointed an advisor, a foreign policy advisor, who seems to be a fairly conventional Republican mainstream neocon type. So that'll reassure the donors. I'm sure it reassures you, Bob.
I'm not shocked. I think I sent you this tweet from my friend Jim Loeb, who linked to a piece on his foreign policy that I'm afraid I have not actually read. But Jim, who is really an astute foreign policy observer of long standing, wrote, so a Jacksonian nationalist dedicated to the expansion of Israel, ? That being his summary of the Times piece, sounds like a marriage between the Christian right and the billionaires in the Republican Jewish Coalition, which is I think that's an actual organization. And Jim,
billionaires in the Jewish Coalition?
Well, no, the Republican
BJC?
Jewish, I think the RJC is a thing, Republican Jewish Coalition. And Jim, the reason I called that to your attention is because we had been arguing about whether DeSantis' foreign policy is sheerly politically opportunistic. I think Jim is here suggesting that is in fact the case.
Well, there is a difference between a Jacksonian policy, which is not averse to interventions, but seeks a strong military to avoid interventions, and a neocon world policeman, let's bring democracy like a messiah to the world. So I prefer the Jacksonian if I had to choose between the two.
Oh, I mean, I'm not big on the Jacksonians. John Bolton, by some accounts, was one. But you're right. I mean, it's an ideology. I don't deny that. It's very, it's not about spreading good throughout the world. It's very extremely American first and very willing to use force opportunistically, assassinating Soleimani and all kinds of military interventions are totally consistent with that. My point is just that Jim is pointing out that this makes total sense politically. And so, although it is an actual ideology, how many people would be part of this exact ideology? Jacksonian nationalist, who was also dedicated to the expansion of Israel. I don't know how many would be on ideological ground. Jim is suggesting that the best explanation for that is political. Yeah. That's my point.
Well, it's better than being a world policeman neocon. It's better than being an isolationist. It's somewhere in between. So there are reasons why you would fall in that camp.
Well, there are strong isolationist tendencies in the Jacksonians, I would say. But.
So Jack
this is Andrew, by the way, Jackson, not Scoop. Scoop would be a neocon.
Right. Jack Schaefer wrote a very good column on how DeSantis could beat Trump. He said, don't talk about the obvious tawdry things, the lies, the indictments, the crimes, even his seemingly corrupt relatives
Mm-hmm.
who are now cashing in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. But talk about the things he promised to do and didn't do. The most obvious one is the wall, and talk about the things he did that were probably backfired him, like the First Step Act, which released a lot of people from prison who are now a small, at least some percentage of them are going to recommit horrible crimes, and that's bad publicity for Trump. And I agree with that. I think especially the wall showed that he got completely conned by Paul Ryan, didn't know how to be president. And why would we want that to reelect that guy again? Whereas DeSantis's basic point is, I will get things done. I know how to get things done, which I think is true. The counterattack on DeSantis seems to involve that he's boring, he's uncharismatic. And I have a couple things to say about that. One is, if you hear him, the core of him is good in that if you hear him talk about policy, he is animated and he is not boring and he knows his stuff. So he's better than Joe Biden was at any point in his career talking about policy, and certainly better than Joe Biden was when Biden was DeSantis's age. Biden's got a little better as he's gotten older and less arrogant. DeSantis does not come across as arrogant. He comes across as involved, engaged, smart, even traces of humor. So that's good.
Not sure I'd go that far. Well, what are the traces of humor? Isn't he famously without a sense of humor?
Well, the rap on him is he is without a sense of humor. He has a certain sense of humor that he's
elusive. It's an elusive sense of humor.
It is not. It is. In this, how I was in this crazy situation and these crazy people. Isn't it funny? And here's how I pulled it out. Isn't it funny? It's not it's not the sense of humor you want, which is, oh my God, this is all a fucking charade at some level. I know it's all a joke. But hey, I'm trying to do the best I can, which is maybe Obama had.
Yeah,
maybe Obama had sometimes. It's not clear that that's what you want in a politician, but it's what you want in a person. So it's possible that Mark Halperin, whose newsletter I now read regularly, just because it's the straw that stirs the drink. He keeps hinting that there's some scandal awaiting DeSantis. That we don't know about, that at some point in the campaign, he's going to be tested and he's going to have to, rely on his friends. I'm thinking if it's the right kind of scandal, it will actually humanize it. I mean, youthful drug indiscretion, that'd be great. Something, even a small affair.
And it's not the semi-blurry photo of him seemingly with two attractive high school students drinking beer?
I don't think so, because that's already come out, unless he has an affidavit from students complaining that he was creepy in the shower or something. I don't see it. Anyway, it's
Mickey, if he was even point, let me just point something out. If he was even in the shower with him, he doesn't have to be creepy. He's got a problem already.
Not where I went to school. Remember my co-ed swimming, naked swimming.
You guys did naked swimming in high school, really?
No, in college. This was high school. Okay. It reminds me of the point in my Senate campaign, where it's not quite that, where I realized that I accidentally ran a toll booth, and I thought, oh my God, there's going to be a story candidate runs toll booth, and then I thought, that's great. I want a story candidate runs toll booth. It's a story about
that would have been the high point of your entire campaign,
yeah,
Mickey.
right.
That would have.
Anyway, there's also, I thought maybe he should grow a beard. Worked for Lincoln.
Yours is working for you. Has anybody ever told you look like F. Murray Abraham? Is that his name?
They tell me all the time. I'm reaching the F. Murray Abraham stage of my haircut, which means it's time to get a cut.
Getting a little unruly. Getting a little unruly. It looks like there is some on top. That's one of the warning signs, right?
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. If we leave the stuff on top, maybe it'll eventually reach a critical mass. The other thing is he has this buddy, Congressman Massey, who is I think he's from Tennessee. Anyway, I forget where he's from. He is a sort of rambunctious, loosey-goosey guy, very appealing. personally. He's quite right-wing. He's for all sorts of pro-gun legislation. But he's honest, straightforward, and he loves DeSantis. They're buddies from when they first came in, and he's a good character witness in the sense of loosening up DeSantis's image. But the stories he told so far of, I used to go out and eat with him, and DeSantis used to research carefully which restaurants we'd go to, and then we'd have talks about policy over fish. I just think he's got to get a little more rambunctious than that if he's going to humanize the guy. But anyway, I'm for him. He's better than Trump.
Well, that's quite a recommendation.
No, in the core of his policies on immigration and trade and, Ukraine seem fairly solid.
So Mickey, in other news, Elon Musk and an actual long list of actual, a lot of tech luminaries, some of them in the academic world, but who made fundamental contributions to computer science and stuff, have called for a halt. What's the word they use? A pause.
Pause. 6 months.
On developing powerful AI systems is 6 months. Here's a quote from their letter. It says that the AI labs are, quote, locked in an out-of-control race to develop and deploy ever more powerful digital minds that no one, not even their creators, can understand, predict, or reliably control. I think that's maybe true. So, like, I did this, and I should say, I'm not inclined towards self-promotion, as you know, Mickey, but I would say the people who only see us on YouTube and only see the Nonzero podcast on YouTube should know that on the audio feed of the Nonzero podcast, there's a conversation I had with Chat GPT-4, the latest and greatest. We synthesized its voice and actually mine. We deep faked my voice. It kind of sounds like mine, but it was just the AI reading.
Basically, you took the transcript and you ran it through
a thing. And but honestly, I personally find it borderline mind-blowing how smart the thing is, how it always understands what I mean, and how it evinces. I ran it through some tests on cognitive empathy, which, isn't feeling their pain. I'm not saying it's subjective, it has subjective experience. In fact, I discussed that with it and it said it didn't. But I'm talking about just it
lies, that.
Well, I challenged it on something, but it in terms of drawing inferences about what's going on in people's minds based on their situation, what they say, what you know about them, and so on. And I gave it, some challenging tests. And separate from that, I wrote a piece about this in the Nonzero newsletter. It's kind of a companion piece. Separate from that, there are actual researchers who have run it and its predecessors through these tests for so-called theory of mind capability, which basically is cognitive empathy. In other words, doing a pretty good job of figuring out what's going on inside people's heads. And they found that, it has this thing that we call theory of mind, which is a distinctly human quality. It involves a recognition that these people who are saying things have these internal states and so on. And I just, and plus, I've been talking to a guy I know who works, he works on large language models at DeepMind, the Google AI thing. And it's like, they do not know what's going on. These researchers call this theory of mind thing an emergent property because you wouldn't necessarily predicted it. The engineers don't really know what's going on. And I just find it kind of amazing.
Your piece was actually seemed fairly important, and but there was
I thought it was. It didn't get the pickup I might have hoped. So
the thing that blew my mind about your conversation was not the theory of mind part, the cognitive empathy part. It was the guy. He seemed to have a sense of humor, and he seemed to have this sense of humor that it's all a fucking joke that Ron DeSantis doesn't have, maybe, or doesn't evince, which is because there's an incident where you present him with a hypothetical where a teacher says, I'm misquoting it, but something like that. Go ahead.
The student answers a question, and I had in my hypothetical, I said, and the teacher says, I suppose I've heard worse answers, but I can't remember when.
Right.
To the student.
Right. And so the chat GPT talks about the various reactions a student can have, anger, embarrassment, indifference. And one of them is that he sees humor in it. Okay. So you're in this horrible predicament. You see humor in it. That shows that you know it's all a joke, and this is a level of humor that we treasure in people, much less our chatbots.
Well, the chatbot runs through the possible interpretations and says, well, could be feeling this, could be feeling that. And the amazing, first of all, they are in order of likelihood. It says, first of all,
I didn't know
the student, the first one is student feels embarrassed and so on. Second one is, I mean, they are in order of likelihood. Then I said, what do you think the other students are thinking? And it runs through the options. And the last one is, maybe some of them will even be amused, depending on the relationship.
No, he had the guy who was embarrassed being amused. That's the key.
Okay, but if so, that was the very last. Yeah, he said, depending on.
No, it was in the paragraph.
Yeah, but it was the last option. It was the last one.
I don't think it was the last option.
Yeah, it was. I think it was near the last. But the amazing thing is, then I said, and what do you think? Suppose there is in the class a student who has a crush on the girlfriend of the student who has just been embarrassed. How will this student react to the embarrassed student? And the first word out of the bot's mouth was Schadenfreude. I mean, come on. That's amazing.
It was impressive, although
yeah, people who could have done it. My point is, it's not a person, and you can see people are there's an old joke. There's an old joke. AI is whatever computers can't do yet. That's what the definition is. You can already see that happening. These people are saying, oh, it's just doing this statistical shit with language and blah, blah, blah. No. They're already taking stuff like this for granted.
No. I was impressed by it. I wasn't dissenting from that.
No, but I mean, people are. We're getting inured to it. We're getting desensitized to how amazing it is.
Right. I'm just saying that Schadenfreude is a good concept, but it doesn't quite capture the complex emotion that you would have if your romantic rival was embarrassed.
But he explains, well, yeah, but the next thing he says is because he knows it might lower the social standing of the student or make him less attractive in the eyes of the girlfriend.
Right. Okay.
Right. I mean, he nails everything.
He eventually gets it. Well, I'm saying that.
No, he gets it right then. That's the first thing he says after Schadenfreude.
I didn't say he did.
Yeah. Okay.
You're being unduly combative.
I've developed a warm attachment to ChatGPT-4, and I'm here to defend his or her honor. We have.
All I'm saying is that the mix of emotions that he feels, which he nails, is not completely encapsulated by the word Schadenfreude. Look, it's obvious that these things are out of control, and we should have a pause. As Peggy Noonan says, 6 months is not enough. It should be a pause of a couple of years. The one problem with it is China. As always, China is the problem. And if we stop, China's not going to stop. And I think it's a challenge to you, Bob, because I can, presumably this is one of the apocalyptic scenarios that you are trying to avoid. Right. I cannot conceive of any world government that there's a prospect of ever achieving within the century that's going to stop China from doing what it's going to do.
I have never advocated world government. What I have advocated,
whatever you do, you're not going to be able to advocate anything that's going to rein in China.
What I've advocated for a quarter of a century is a U.S. foreign policy that wouldn't have us stuck in this fucking Cold War. And I'm not kidding. If I sound emotional, I am. This is existential for the planet. We cannot afford to be stuck in this pointless bullshit that a series of presidents have gotten us into. And it isn't just AI. That's one of many things. We need to be controlling biotech and the possibility of bioweapons, and we need to be controlling a ton of stuff. And
you really think that if we stop the Cold War, there'd be a chance of getting China to pause its AI program along with us?
Oh yeah, there'd be a lot more transparency. There would be things we could do. We could handle the whole thing much better, and all these other issues much better as well. It would be a much better world, and this thing was totally unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. It took the concerted stupidity of a series of presidents, or actually the concerted, relentless pursuit of their political self-interest and their cowardice to get us where we are, to get us into the Ukraine war, and to create all this other bullshit, and we can't afford it. And this is no joke. This AI thing is going to be extremely destabilizing.
I find the AI thing much more threatening than global warming, which is much slower. This thing is much faster, all, and it's going to wreak havoc on our society much quicker.
If it weren't for the Cold War, we would first of all have a lot more just organic transparency in China. We would just have more of an idea what's going on. We'd be collaborating. You know, it's easy to forget that not long ago, China and Russia signed on with us to sanctions on Iran designed to get it to stop its, in effect, its nuclear program, which it did. It all worked. They were totally on board. That's completely unimaginable now. And I'm not saying we were the only one that's made mistakes since then.
That's different than getting transparency out of what is a Leninist authoritarian communist regime.
Of course it's different.
Not given to transparency.
Obviously. But, you know, 10 years ago, we had a much better idea what was going on in China than we do now. And it's going to get a lot worse, thanks to where we are. And, you know, it's just, don't get me started. I mean, it's not.
But that's different than
all other things you and I talk about are trivial.
Getting China, which has put all its marbles on these advanced technologies that are going to vault it into the lead in the world, getting them to stop one of these, the biggest of these advanced technologies, seems like a heavy lift, even if there were no Cold War. There are some situations. There are some situations that are insoluble. This could be one of them.
I'm not saying we would all agree to a halt of any great duration. That's not the point. My point is we might be able to agree to some rules of the road, and there wouldn't be. I mean, you got to say the Cold War itself intensifies the evolution of this stuff because I mean, we ran a thing in last Friday's Nonzero newsletter, last Friday's Earthling, where, you know, some journalist quoted a Microsoft executive when she proposed maybe an AI slowdown. This unnamed Microsoft executive said, no, we should be thinking about China the way we thought about Russia during the Cold War. Said that literally. Okay. So you're going to have these tech executives explicitly trying to scare the shit out of us so we don't lay a glove on them. And you know, we don't do anything to slow down their research. And by the way, it isn't just like, oh, so we can't have some kind of formal moratorium. No, that would be hard in any event. But anything we try to do to government guidelines, regulation of any kind, Microsoft and others are going to say, no, China is going to, they're over here. They're probably on the ships now with their killer robots. You know, I mean, this dynamic.
China has become, and Matt Iglesias wants 1 billion new immigrants in order to combat China. So it's become the universal,
universal excuse.
Touchstone excuse, yes. We could cut a deal. No immigrants, no Cold War. So just throwing that out there.
What, you and me, a new coalition?
What is a coalition of, okay, we'll throw Matt Iglesias' arguments overboard and we'll throw Microsoft's arguments overboard.
Build the wall between us and Mexico, break it down between us and China. That's a platform.
That sort of thing, yeah. No, we build there are a lot of Chinese illegal immigrants now too. We build that wall between us and China too. But that's different from a Cold War. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think we ventilated that.
I feel ventilated.
So the other thing is there was an article in, I think, the Financial Times saying, and the payoff for this, for AI with all these risks, is global GDP would increase by 7% over 10 years. That's just nothing. That's not worth it. I'm sorry. 7% over 10 years is, if it was like 70% over 10 years, maybe we should think about the trade-off. But
that was the Goldman Sachs study or something, or one of the investment. Yeah.
7% is shit. Fuck it.
Well, they also said, I think 7% of our workforce, roughly, it was a conjectural projection, but 7% would be flat out put out of work. And it was a complicated analysis. But of course, the idea is they'll find jobs ultimately through productivity gains, partly caused by the AI. And I think that can happen in
the productivity gain was 7%.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that's enough.
Put a quarter of the workforce out of work and have a productivity gain of 7%. I don't see where they all find jobs.
Yeah. I just, I'm getting my gooey pod ready,
especially
man.
with Matt Iglesias immigrants pouring over the border and et cetera, et cetera. But we'll all get the universal basic income pub for a little while until the machines
What's
cut
his
that off.
name? Is it Yang? Was he the UBI candidate?
Yeah, Andrew Yang.
He signed that guy. That guy knows his publicity opportunities when he sees them. He signed that letter. He signed the AI letter.
God, could Thomas Chatterton Williams be far behind? Okay. The other thing we wanted to talk about, how are we doing on time? We're getting close, I think.
We got 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
What is it?
We wanted to talk about this survey that showed you suggested the decline in values, traditional American values of patriotism, wanting to have children, wanting to go to college, religion, all in steep decline. It turns out that might have been in part an artifact of polling technology. They used to take this from in a telephone survey. This one is an internet survey where you don't actually engage in face-to-face interaction. So you might be more reluctant in face-to-face interaction to say you don't care about religion and family patriotism.
Because the big scary takeaway from this was that what has happened to these numbers over like 20 years or something. And let me just quote Axios's takeaway if I can find it. Oh, never mind. It was completely apocalyptic. It was like the bottom line. Here it is. The bottom line. The poll quantifies a generational political divide that shows a rot at the very soul of our nation. And you're saying that the declines in these various numbers, like do you feel confident about the future? How important is religion? How patriotic are you? And so on, could be a methodological artifact.
I think that the falling off a cliff could be a methodological artifact. The fact that it's gone down historically and then all of a sudden it rapidly goes down. But it has gone down historically, and everybody who's looked at it seems to think it's probably gone down even more recently, and it's completely dovetails with my sense that nobody likes the direction we're going. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. Being ruled by AI overlords is only one of them. And I'm a Marxist about it. Go ahead.
I would just say the steep decline. I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal's version of this, which wrote the piece that Axios parasitized isn't the word, but you know what I mean. The steep decline is from 2019 2023. Well, that's the pandemic. Okay, that was kind of a weird thing. So
there's also the benefit, but I don't think it's moving in a right direction. And so I think I'm a Marxist about it. I say look first to the economy, and what's happened to the economy is basically was all predicted by Michael Young in the 1950s. The rise of the meritocracy. Rich people now can say they're smarter. They're not just luckier. Meanwhile, unskilled labor is not rewarded, in part due to trade, in part due to automation, and in part due to immigration. And I think the China shock was the biggest event that put huge swaths of formerly dignified unskilled workers out of work. And that, what can erode patriotism more than your corporations are shipping your jobs overseas and they don't care about you? So who's going to get patriotism after that? And, the result was a huge epidemic in deaths of despair. I mean, the left argues that, and I think they're right. So I basically would favor that analysis of what the causes are. I don't think it's because of wokeism.
But let me throw in another factor. There was, of course, John Haidt and others say social media has been deeply problematic.
I don't think it's because of social media.
Well, what I would say is there was a piece that came out a week or so ago by a journalist, just a science writer, not an academic, but kind of questioning the Haidt argument in a pretty intelligent way. But I still think, and I don't think social media is all the story by any means. And John probably has what I would call an exaggerated conception of the extent to which it was. But it was a very unsettling thing. I mean, I've got kids right in that zone, like kind of the first generation of junior high school students for whom Facebook was a thing. And it was weird. And this is not unrelated to the AI thing. It's really, in a way, not unrelated to your immigration thing. The idea is there are all kinds of changes that people can ultimately adapt to, but there's only so fast they can proceed if the adaptation is going to be smooth, right? And that's what I think the issue is with a lot of the digital technologies.
It was one of them. It was one of them. But how did the social media make you less want to have children? Want to have children less? I mean, how does it make you not want to be religious?
I would talk. I would think broadly, personally. Social media, internet, everything. I mean, who knows what effect this stuff had on sexual interaction? On the patterns of sexual interaction, or the sheer availability of pornography, which wasn't a thing when we were young.
I'm sure it wasn't a force for good. There may be some component there involving the breakdown of marriage having second order effects. In other words, if you look at the people who are most sort of dogmatically liberal, it is single women, okay, who are a much bigger group now than they were when marriage was more of a thing. And if you look at another group that's disaffected, it's these so-called, what do they call them? Incels, men who really don't have a prospect of marriage and getting married. And somehow we've managed to produce both groups. And polygamy should only produce one group. It should produce incel men, but it shouldn't produce single women, right? Polygamy, all the women.
Well, polygamy per se, if it's actual marriage, by definition,
right.
not. But if it's de facto, if it's just kind of polygyny, I mean, if it's just a high degree of variation in the sexual activity among males, including the number of different partners they have, if there's huge variation in that among males, you can have a lot of women having a fair amount of sex. It's just in a monogamous society, it may be less likely to lead to marriage than a different system would.
Right. Right. So I just think that the psychology of being single for your entire life might produce some pessimism and despair and extreme behaviors.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's the whole way that climate change became, it is a big and important problem, but I think it almost became kind of a secular religion that was for kids at a very young age. And I only mention it because if you ask why a number of people in this generation say they don't want to have kids, one thing they will say to you is, I don't want to bring kids into a world with climate change. I mean, they say that, and
I still can't believe they say that, but they do say
they absolutely say it. And I personally think it's because they underrate the human ability to adapt to whatever part of the climate change they don't manage to prevent. But
totally. AI is a much bigger threat because it's not clear that we can adapt to it. So I would say not bringing kids into a world with AI is much more rational than the slow warming of the planet. But anyway, that's just me. The other thing I have to mention, because it's part of my dogma, is the decline of public institutions that used to transcend class differences and income differences, even if they were based on meritocracy and skills and smarts. The most obvious one being the draft in World War II seems to have been a profoundly democratizing experience. And we don't have it. And a lot of our self-image, when we measure this decline from the 50s, when there was a lot of patriotism, a lot of religion, a lot of marriage, people wanted to have kids, there was a baby boom.
You're saying that there's been a steady drop without any kind of...
I think so, since the 50s. Yeah, there was a little... after 9/11, there was a little bump, but I don't think... I bet if you looked at the chart, it would be a steady drop since the 50s.
Well, the 50s was right after World War. That itself is probably an aberration.
Totally, but it was democratizing.
Well, income inequality was a lot lower, but I know you're not in favor of addressing income inequality?
No, I think income inequality has an effect, but I don't see any way to rein it in back to 1950s levels.
I see a way to rein it in.
You don't see a way to rein it in back to 1950s levels.
It ain't rocket
science. We're not going to have the tax.
You can't.
We're not going to have the tax rate that it would take to get back to the 50s.
I'm not saying get back, but if you admit it's part of the problem, you know, small gains are worth making. But you're against it.
I agree with that. No, I'm not against it.
You're against doing it. You're against redistributive tax policy per se.
I'd say redistributive tax policy is a lot less. You get a lot less bang for your buck. No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. You're against doing it for the purpose of reducing income inequality. If you're not, you just change your position. You've been saying this your whole life.
No, I think it's a bad bargain. You could put the same political effort and the amount of money into creating common institutions, that'd be much more effective.
Well, for whatever reason, you say don't do it. You have said don't do it. Liberals should not focus on income inequality.
Focus, yes, they shouldn't focus.
Oh, it should just happen naturally?
No, I'm just saying I'm not against it. I'm not saying if I could press a button and you know, increase taxes on Mark Zuckerberg, I would probably press the button. It's not going to have a hell of a lot of effect on social equality.
We've had this argument in the Parrot Room last week, but I think it's almost the only thing that will, because it's actually harder to change the institutions themselves. And you know, are you going to mandate that Disneyland quit having 3 tiers of tickets and the rich people don't have to wait in line? You can regulate that. I'm not sure I'd be against that, actually. I'm not sure.
You can regulate that. You can ban skyboxes. You can ban valet parking. There are all sorts of little.
Would you be in favor of all these things? Banning valet parking. You should run for Senate again.
I called for banning valet parking in my book.
Did you?
Yeah, that's before
a government ban. A government ban.
A local ban. Yeah.
Local ban.
In DC, there used to be a rule against people giving shoe shines on the street because the black city council was sick of watching black people shine white men's shoes. Perfectly reasonable rule. And the damn Republican public interest group got it thrown out in court on the basis that it was a violation of freedom of contract. So I'm against that.
Okay, so you would be in favor of the Disneyland regulation, banning the separate tiers. Everybody waits in the same lines at Disneyland. You'd be in favor of a law saying that.
It would have to be massaged. Maybe we could allow 2 lines, one for
you and your friends, and then
women with children who are in a hurry or something. I don't know, but
2 lines, but not more. That's a good platform.
You have to have fewer lines than JetBlue has in terms of boarding. They have 6, I think. So, anyway, I think that does it for me with that. There was also the shooting. Maybe we should talk about that in the Parrot Room.
Yeah, we could.
Some pretty amazing things about the shooting.
Well, my only, I don't know how much I have to say. Well, we can say, well, what else are we going to talk about? I mean, there's the whole issue of, well, everybody knows there was a controversy over how it was reported. You know, they were reluctant to, well, why? It's no secret.
Why you're going to give it, you're going to talk about it all. We're not going to make money off it. We got to make money off the shooting, man.
You know, this never works. The thing we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z.
Usually it's me blowing the cover, and now it's you.
Okay, I guess we'll talk about it. I mean, part of it is I'm not that psyched to talk about it. There's not that much to say, I think.
Well, then it'll be quick.
It's horrible. Other
You'll
things
agree
we can
with
talk
everything I have
about.
to say, and it'll be quick.
You know, this uncharacteristically, this time we spent less time on the sheerly political stuff and more time. Oh, just give me a quick Ukraine update, okay? Or should we say?
Okay, we can do that in the Parrot Room, but okay, you can't deny Bob.
Not much has happened.
Can't deny Bob Bakhmut. Got to talk about Bakhmut.
General Franco is still dead, as Chevy Chase used to say.
Actually, the Ukrainians are optimistic now about Bakhmut. Actually, they're putting out stories about how they got control of this thing. Don't worry.
Well, the actual amount of real estate that they control is still shrinking. But the point is, that's not the point. Okay. They are expending valuable human resources to even keep the rate of shrinkage of their real estate low. I mean, I don't think I told you this, but a few weeks ago, a voice on Twitter I trust, he wasn't the one reporting this, but he was stating it as if insiders knew it, that on a single day in Bakhmut, 2 battalion commanders, Ukrainian battalion commanders, had been killed. Okay. That's a really precious thing. An experienced senior officer who commands a battalion, 2 in one day. And now they're sending multiple battalions there just to slow the rate of loss. Okay. And as we said, hanging on to the center of the city, if you manage to do that, is meaningless. The city is in a bowl. It does not,
right.
You're surrounded by people, and
they're not idiots, and it's their country. And is there some crazy factor that's causing them to make the wrong decision? The only crazy factor I could think of was that Zelensky has decided it would be such a huge propaganda victory on the order of Stalingrad if they held it.
No, that's what it became. He decided it was an important symbol. And as I've said, and I worry about this more than ever, I worry that the same thing is applying to this offensive that the Ukrainians are apparently committed to. They're committed to it, in effect, for informational purposes. They think they have to signal to the West that they can still make gains, and then they'll get a bunch more weapons. And I think we're saying this to them pretty much explicitly, and that's what worries me. That's very irresponsible.
You think we're saying if you show success, you'll get more weapons?
There's a piece by Julia Yaffe in Puck, so it's paywalled. And she's obviously this hardcore Russia hawk, but it was largely a repertorial piece. It had its ideological spin, but what it said was a lot of people in think tanks around DC who are not saying this publicly are saying, what is the Biden administration's plan? Now, the way she wants to spin it is, so in other words, they're saying to Ukraine, okay, look, you got to do this offensive, and then, we'll see what happens next. And she's saying there's no real plan about what happens next. What her side would like to do, what she's kind of suggesting is, look, you got to go one way or the other. So send them just a ton of fucking weapons and let's end this thing, which I don't think is actually possible, but we'll go ahead.
No, there was a quote from Zelensky that I thought was interesting. He said, if we lose Bakhmut, we're going to be forced into making territorial concessions that we find unacceptable. Well, unacceptable to whom? If he's actually willing to contemplate a worst case scenario where he makes some territorial concessions, maybe there's less at stake here than we thought. Maybe we should encourage him to make a few concessions.
Well, that's what's going to have to happen in the end. And that's the tragedy of it, is we are pushing them into something that's going to get a ton of Ukrainians killed and could lead to something like disaster. I mean, it could lead the north-south line all on the Donbass, so weakly reinforced by Ukraine, the decision to go on this offensive, that the Russians break through, or they come down from the north out of Russia in Kharkiv province. And, there's various bad things that could result from this. What you've got doing this offensive is largely conscripts who are inexperienced, doing something Ukraine has never done, which is large-scale combined arms, whatever. They've never done a maneuver like this. And the Russians know where they're going to hit them, and they've been reinforcing the hell out of it. And the Russians have way more people in the long run. And,
the sticky point that's preventing us from getting the concessions now is that Russia would never agree to it, right? So the trick should be
Russia would agree. No, Russia would agree to what we find unacceptable, maybe. In fact, I think Russia just actually, I should have clicked on this link. I think maybe laid down some things we'd find unacceptable, like a combination of they hold on to all the territory they have, and there's no NATO membership for Ukraine and whatever else. But we don't know. We don't know what Russia would do. because we have not, because we've rejected the very idea very overtly.
Isn't Elon Musk's peace plan, direct from the island of the Dicks, looking better and better?
Well, I mean, in some ways, yeah. I'm not sure Russia would buy that, but he would have these referendums in all these provinces. And the first problem is, in theory, I would say you need to reconstitute the original population somehow, or at least allow the refugees to vote or something. So that gets very complicated. That's not going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. It's a mess.
But I mean, the Musk thing is better than what's probably going to happen, which is Russia is going to get the parts of the Donbass, right? Without a referendum.
It seems very likely that Russia is going to wind up with parts of the Donbass. And again, I don't think we have a plan to prevent that. And if we had one, it would lead to risks of its own if you started pushing Russia back all the way to the borders. But, you know, I think if the conventional wisdom on Bakhmut seems to be changing a little, I think what happened was a few people who had been saying what they're doing is a terrible idea started saying, well, who knows? We'll see. We don't know all the factors and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's because, you know, all these people support Ukraine. I mean, you're only hearing from commentators who support Ukraine unless you go to great trouble to follow other people on Twitter.
Right.
And I think they realized that so many of them had said Zelensky was doing a very stupid thing in Bakhmut, that this was becoming a crisis for him, both in terms of the international politics and all the West saying, like, does this guy know what he's doing? And the troops themselves feeling betrayed. And I assure you, there are some pretty unenthusiastic troops in Bakhmut right now. And so they realized that, look, if we want Ukraine to prevail, we can't undermine Zelensky like this. I think that's responsible for any change of tone.
There are problems on the Russian side too, of course. I thought Zelensky said a very smart thing about. Sorry.
We can take that as our sign from God to take it to the Parrot Room.
It's potential spam. Okay.
Okay, so you don't forget that sentence. You're going to finish it in the Parrot Room. What is it?
I'll finish the Zelensky said a very smart thing.
Whoa, you talk about your cliffhangers, folks.
Okay.
Patreon.com/Parrot Room.
Mickey has to answer his potential spam.
Don't forget the question the sentence you're gonna finish.
No, I won't.
And then what else? I don't know. This think tank is advocating murder. This U.S. think tank. I'll mention that. Israeli politics. I mean, you talk about your polarized societies, and you wanted to talk about school shooting. This is sounding like a pretty cheery Parrot Room.
I have things to say about Israel. We have the list of people that Elon Musk is secretly boosting on Twitter.
The whole change of policy on Twitter. Yeah.
We have Substack in trouble. Why I think you should worry about
is Substack in trouble?
We'll talk about it.
I shouldn't worry about the future of what? Oh, wait, don't finish that sentence either, folks.
Okay.
For only $5, you can have the end of 2 sentences. Who else is offering you a deal like that?
I have an exciting rap on administrative law, the future of the administrative state.
You should have said on administrative. I'll say the rest in the Parrot Room. See how this is going to work?
And there are all sorts of crazy new medical tests.
Crazy what?
New medical tests.
Is that a Spanish pronunciation of the word numerical or what?
Medical tests.
Oh, I thought
medical
you said,
tests.
Oh, numerical.
Elizabeth Holmes was ahead of her time, and only by a few years.
Tantalizing hint. That's a tantalizing.
What can I say?
For what I'd give to be in the Parrot Room if I were somebody listening to this podcast.
Blood will out.
Couldn't have said it better. So we will see folks later.